I've never been the type to share this kind of thing. Even now, after all these years, my palms get sweaty thinking about telling you what happened to me in Vietnam. It's not the kind of war story veterans typically share over beers. But I'm getting older now, turned 74 last spring, and I can't take this to my grave. What I experienced needs to be told. Someone might need to hear it. Before I start, you should know that I was a skeptic. Raised Methodist, but hardly ever went to church after I turned 16. I believed in what I could see, touch, and prove. The military reinforced that mindset. Trust your training, trust your senses, trust your squad. Everything else was sentimentality that could get you killed. Vietnam changed all that. Not the war itself, though God knows that changed me in plenty of other ways. But what happened on April 17th, 1969, the day I died. I was a sergeant with the 25th Infantry Division, assigned to a squadron operating in the dense jungle northwest of Saigon. By then, I'd been in country for 9 months. Not quite a short timer, but I'd survived long enough to help break in the new guys. That April was hot, even by Vietnam standards. The air hung on you like a wet wool blanket. Our fatigues were perpetually soaked, if not from sweat, then from the afternoon downpours that turned the ground beneath our boots into a sucking muddy mess. The mosquitoes were relentless, and the constant dampness meant jungle rot was eating away at everybody's feet. But these were just the background conditions of our lives. You got used to it. We'd been running reconnaissance patrols through the same 20-kilometer stretch for weeks, making contact with enemy forces just often enough to keep us on edge, but not so often that we felt we were making any difference in this war. Home felt like a dream I'd once had. Vietnam had become my reality. Our squad had picked up a new lieutenant 2 weeks earlier. Lieutenant Thomas Ellery, fresh out of officer training and eager to make his mark. Nice enough, kid. Polite, respectful of the NCOs who'd been in country longer, but you could tell he was itching to see some action. He had that look in his eyes that made experienced guys nervous. The look that said he had something to prove. The night before it happened, we were sitting around after chow. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the ever-present smell of insect repellent. Davies was cleaning his M16 for the 3rd time that day, a nervous habit he'd developed after our last firefight. Martinez was writing a letter home, hunched over it protectively, like he was afraid someone would read the sweet things he was saying to his girl back in San Antonio. I was playing cards with Wilson, a lanky farm kid from Nebraska who could barely grow a mustache, but had the steadiest hands on patrol. We were betting with C-ration cigarettes neither of us smoked, but it was the principle of the thing. You ever think about what you're gonna do when you get back, Sarge? Wilson asked, studying his cards with excessive concentration. Open a garage, I said without hesitation. My uncle has a place in Pennsylvania. Says I can buy in when I rotate home. I laid down my cards. Full house. Wilson cursed and tossed his cards down. Shiranasha should have known better than to play with you. I gathered up my winnings, feeling the familiar pang of homesickness that came with talking about after Vietnam. The garage wasn't just a plan, it was a talisman. A good luck charm I held on to during firefights and long, tense patrols. If I focused on the details, the smell of motor oil, the feel of tools in my hands, the satisfaction of fixing something broken, I could almost convince myself I'd make it home to realize that dream. Gentlemen, Lieutenant Ellery approached our little circle, his face serious in the fading light. Early patrol tomorrow. We've got reports of NVA movement near the riverbend. I want everyone ready to move out at 0500. A collective groan went up, but it was mostly for show. Early patrol or late patrol, it didn't much matter in the jungle. Sleep was a luxury rarely enjoyed in the consecutive hours anyway. Wilson, you're on point, the lieutenant continued. Martinez, you'll take rear. Sergeant Allen, I want you on the radio. I nodded, suppressing my frown. I preferred walking point or rear security, positions where I could see what was coming. Radio duty meant staying close to the lieutenant, which put me in the middle of the column. It was technically safer, but it always made me feel trapped. Get some rest. Ellery finished, then moved on to brief the next group. Lucky you, Wilson muttered. Lieutenant's pet. I punched his arm lightly. Yeah, real lucky. I get to listen to him call in our position every 30 minutes while you get to scan for tripwires. Wilson grinned. Fair point. I'll trade you. In your dreams, kid. Later, in my hammock strung between 2 trees, I tried to sleep but found myself staring up at the fragments of sky visible through the jungle canopy. The stars looked different in Vietnam, or maybe it was just that I was different. Either way, they seemed farther away, colder somehow. I thought about writing to my girl Carol back home, but decided against it. My last few letters had been short and impersonal, and I could tell from her responses that she was worried. What could I say? That I was starting to forget what her face looked like? That I couldn't remember the sound of her laugh? Instead, I closed my eyes and thought about the garage again. The concrete floor swept clean at the end of the day, the orderly tools hanging on the pegboard, the smell of coffee brewing in the office. I'd hire some local kid to help out, teach him the trade. Maybe Wilson, if he wanted to come to Pennsylvania after all this. He had good hands. Could probably fix anything with enough practice. I must have drifted off eventually because the next thing I knew, Rodriguez was shaking me awake in the pre-dawn darkness. Rise and shine, Sarge. Lieutenant's already up and looking anxious. I groaned but rolled out of my hammock, feeling the familiar ache in my lower back. A souvenir from a hard landing during a helicopter insertion 2 months earlier. The jungle was waking up around us, filling with the sounds of birds and insects. I quickly packed my gear, checked my weapon, and made my way to where the squad was gathering. The lieutenant was standing over a map, flashlight pointed down to minimize our visible signature. He looked up as I approached. Sergeant Allen. Good. I want to go over the route one more time. I nodded, crouching beside him as he traced our planned path along the wrinkled map. Intelligence suggests increased activity in this area, he said, pointing to a bend in the river about 5 clicks from our position. Could be a supply route or a staging area. Either way, Division wants eyes on it. Understood, sir, I said, studying the terrain. The route would take us through some of the densest parts of the jungle, but it avoided the more open areas where we'd be exposed. It was a reasonable plan, if ambitious for a single day's patrol. Do we have extraction coordinates? Here, he said, pointing to a small clearing about 2 clicks beyond the river bend. If all goes well, we do our reconnaissance and make it to the extraction point by 1600 hours. If all goes well, in Vietnam that was a mighty big if. We moved out just before dawn, a line of shadows slipping through the jungle. Wilson was on point, his eyes constantly scanning the ground and the foliage ahead. Behind him came Peters with the M60 machine gun, then Lieutenant Ellery, myself with the radio, and the rest of the squad strung out behind us with Martinez bringing up the rear. The first few hours were uneventful. The jungle was alive with the normal sounds. Birds, insects, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. We maintained noise discipline, communicating with hand signals and moving with the careful deliberation that becomes second nature after months in hostile territory. By mid-morning, the heat was oppressive. Sweat ran down my back and soaked through my uniform. The radio felt twice as heavy as it had at dawn. We stopped briefly to drink water and check our position. The lieutenant seemed pleased with our progress, but I noticed a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there earlier. Everything all right, sir? I asked quietly as the others took the opportunity to rest. Fine, Sergeant, he said a bit too quickly. Just want to make sure we reach the objective with enough daylight for a thorough assessment. I nodded, but something about his manner put me on edge. He was pushing the pace faster than was prudent in this terrain. It wasn't reckless yet, but it was trending that way. We continued on, the jungle growing denser as we approached the river. The ground began to slope downward, and the air became noticeably more humid as we neared the water. The sound of the river, a constant, low rushing, gradually became audible through the jungle noise. Wilson held up his fist and we all froze. The signal rippled down the line, possible movement ahead. We crouched, weapons ready, senses straining. After a tense minute, Wilson signaled all clear and gestured for the lieutenant to join him. I followed, the radio a cumbersome presence on my back. Trail, Wilson whispered, pointing to what looked like random jungle floor to my untrained eye. But as I looked closer, I could see the subtle signs. Vegetation disturbed in a linear pattern, the ground compressed in places. Recent? The lieutenant asked. Wilson nodded. Very. Could be just animals, but he shrugged. We all knew better. Animals didn't try to hide their trails. The lieutenant considered this information, then made a decision. We continue as planned, but with extra caution. This could lead us right to what we're looking for. I wasn't so sure. Fresh trails could just as easily lead us into an ambush as to valuable intelligence. But I kept my concerns to myself for the moment. The lieutenant was in command, and he wasn't making an obviously wrong decision, just one that increased our risk somewhat. We moved forward again, more slowly now. Wilson was practically crawling, checking every step for tripwires or pressure plates. The rest of us were equally cautious, eyes scanning not just ahead into the sides, but up into the trees as well. The Viet Cong were known for their ingenuity when it came to ambush positions. The trail grew more distinct as we followed it. Multiple people had passed this way and recently. The lieutenant's excitement was almost palpable, but the rest of us grew increasingly tense. This was starting to feel wrong. Too easy. We were about half a click from the river when Wilson froze again, but this time his hand signal was different. Enemy sighted. We all dropped to the ground, weapons ready. I pressed myself into the earth, the radio digging uncomfortably into my back. The lieutenant crawled forward to Wilson's position. I followed, staying low. When I reached them, Wilson pointed silently through the foliage. About 50 meters ahead, barely visible through the dense vegetation, was a small clearing. And in that clearing were 4 or 5 figures moving around what appeared to be supply crates. The lieutenant's eyes widened. This was exactly what we'd been sent to find. Evidence of supply movement in this sector. He gestured for me to ready the radio. I nodded and began preparing to call in our position and findings. But something still felt off. The clearing was too exposed, the activity too visible. The NVA were typically more careful than this. I leaned toward the lieutenant. "Sir," I whispered, "this doesn't feel right. Why would they be operating so openly?" He frowned. "They probably feel secure this deep in the jungle." "We've achieved our objective, Sergeant. Call it in." I hesitated, then nodded and began the transmission, keeping my voice at a whisper. I reported our coordinates and what we'd observed, requesting further instructions. The response came quickly. Observer 6, maintain position. Monitor activity. Do not engage unless engaged first. Repeat, do not engage. I relayed this to the lieutenant, who nodded with visible disappointment. He'd clearly been hoping for a more active role. Still, orders were orders. We settled in to observe, the squad finding concealed positions from which to watch the clearing while maintaining security to our rear. For nearly an hour, we watched as the figures in the clearing moved supplies, shifting crates, organizing what appeared to be food and ammunition. It was valuable intelligence, confirming that this area was indeed being used as a supply route. Then everything changed in an instant. One of the figures in the clearing looked directly toward our position. It was impossible that he could have seen us. We were well concealed and maintaining strict silence. But something had alerted him. He spoke urgently to the others, and suddenly they were all grabbing weapons and moving to defensive positions. "They've spotted us," the lieutenant whispered urgently. "Prepare to engage." I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. Something was very wrong here. "Sir, I recommend we withdraw. We've completed our reconnaissance mission. No need to engage." Before he could respond, a burst of automatic weapons fire tore through the foliage around us. Everyone dropped flat, but Peters was hit. I could hear him cursing through gritted teeth as he pressed a hand to his bleeding arm. "Return fire!" the lieutenant shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. The squad opened up, sending a barrage toward the clearing. I keyed the radio. "Observer 6 taking fire. Request immediate support." The reply came through garbled. The dense jungle was interfering with our communication. I could make out only fragments. Yori coordinates. Swarm. Air support. 15 minutes. 15 minutes might as well be 15 years in a firefight. I relayed what I could to the lieutenant. "We need to fall back to better ground," I urged. "This position is too exposed." He hesitated, then nodded. "Martinez, Peters, fall back first. Wilson, provide covering fire. The rest of you, prepare to withdraw in sequence." We began executing the withdrawal, maintaining fire toward the clearing as our rear elements moved back to establish a new position. I stayed with the lieutenant, the radio still my primary responsibility. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. The distinctive whump, whump, whump of helicopter rotors. "Air support already?" the lieutenant asked, hope in his voice. I shook my head, a terrible realization dawning. "No, sir. Wrong direction. That's coming from behind us." Our own helicopters were approaching, but they didn't know our exact position in the dense jungle. And with a firefight underway, "Cease fire," I shouted. "Cease fire immediately." Most of the squad responded to my command, but it was too late. The helicopter pilots, hearing gunfire and seeing muzzle flashes through the jungle canopy, had made a split-second decision about where the enemy was located. I heard the ominous sound of miniguns spinning up. "Get down!" I screamed, tackling the lieutenant as the world around us erupted into chaos. The helicopter's minigun tore through the jungle canopy, sending a hail of bullets and shattered vegetation raining down on us. The noise was deafening, a constant roar punctuated by the splintering of trees and the screams of the wounded. I pressed myself as flat as possible against the ground, feeling the vibration of impacts all around me. Someone nearby was hit badly. I could hear their gurgling breaths. Through a gap in the foliage, I glimpsed the helicopter making another pass, preparing for another burst. I grabbed the radio handset, frantically calling for them to cease fire, identifying ourselves as friendly forces. But either they couldn't hear me over the chaos, or the message wasn't getting through. The second burst was even more devastating than the first. I felt something slam into my back with incredible force, knocking the breath from my lungs. A searing pain spread across my torso. The radio had taken a direct hit, and fragments had torn into my back and side. I rolled over, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. The world seemed to slow down around me. I could see the lieutenant nearby, motionless, his uniform soaked with blood. Wilson was crawling toward me, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying over the ringing in my ears. The pain was overwhelming now, radiating from my back and side throughout my entire body. I tried to press my hand against the wound, but it came away drenched in blood. Too much blood. A strange cold feeling was spreading through me, starting in my extremities and working its way inward. I knew then that I was dying. It wasn't like in the movies. There was no dramatic music, no flashback of my life. Just a growing coldness and the fading of the world around me. My thoughts turned to Carol, to the garage in Pennsylvania that I would never see, to my mother who would receive a folded flag and hollow words about sacrifice and honor, to Wilson and the others who might still survive this if the helicopters realized their mistake in time. The jungle canopy above me seemed to brighten, the gaps between leaves filling with an intense white light that didn't hurt my eyes to look at. The pain was receding now, replaced by a spreading numbness that was almost pleasant in comparison. My last conscious thought was a prayer, not to any God I'd been taught about in Sunday school, but to whatever might be listening. A simple plea, let the others live. Let this mean something. Then darkness took me. I don't know how to describe what happened next. The words in our language aren't adequate. It wasn't like waking up. It wasn't like dreaming. It was like becoming aware on a level I'd never experienced before. The pain was gone, completely gone. So was the weight of my body, the stickiness of blood, the oppressive heat of the jungle. I felt weightless, boundless, free in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was moving, or being moved, upward through the jungle canopy, but I wasn't touching the branches or leaves. It was as if I was passing through them, or they through me. Above, the sky opened up, impossibly blue and vast. I could see the helicopters circling, tiny insects from this new perspective. I could see my squad scattered below, some moving, some still. I could see my own body, broken and bloody, Wilson kneeling beside it, frantically trying to stop the bleeding from wounds that had already taken too much of my life. I felt a deep sadness watching this scene, but it was distant somehow, as if happening to someone else, which in a way it was. I no longer identified with that body below. I was something else now, something more. The ascent continued. The jungle, the helicopters, Vietnam itself grew smaller beneath me. I should have been afraid, but fear seemed to belong to the world I was leaving behind. Instead, I felt a profound peace settling over me, along with a growing sense of anticipation. Then I noticed I wasn't alone. Others were with me, presences rather than bodies. I couldn't see them in any conventional sense, but I was aware of them all the same. They seemed to be guiding me, flanking me on either side as we moved through what I can only describe as a tunnel of light. One presence felt familiar. As I focused on it, it began to take shape, coalescing into a form I recognized, Rodriguez. He had been killed 2 weeks earlier by a sniper. But here he was, smiling at me, whole and uninjured, his eyes filled with a wisdom that hadn't been there in life. "Took a bad hit, Sarge," he said, though I didn't hear the words so much as experience them directly. "Am I dead?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your body is," Rodriguez replied. "You're not." Before I could ask what he meant, the tunnel around us began to widen, opening into a vast space that defies description. It wasn't a place in any sense I understood places to be. It was more like a state of being, a realm of pure consciousness and light. And filling this realm were countless beings of light, some human-shaped, others completely unlike anything I'd ever seen or imagined. They radiated love. That's the only way I can describe it. Pure, unconditional love that washed over me in waves, healing parts of me I hadn't even realized were wounded. One being approached, or became more present to me, it's hard to say which. It was brighter than the others, its light golden and warm. It didn't take a human form, but somehow I knew this being was ancient and immensely wise. Communication with this being wasn't like talking. It was an instantaneous exchange of understanding, deeper and more complete than words could ever be. I was welcomed. I was known, completely known. Every thought I'd ever had, every action I'd ever taken, every fear and hope and dream. And despite this complete knowing, I was loved. Not judged, not condemned, but loved with a completeness that made me realize how partial and conditional human love is by comparison. The being showed me my life, not as a sequential replay, but all at once, as a complex tapestry of connections and consequences. I saw how my actions had affected others, rippling outward in ways I'd never imagined. The kindnesses I'd extended without thought, the hurts I'd caused without intention, the moments where I'd chosen courage over fear, compassion over indifference. I saw my death too, not just the physical event, but its impact. The grief of my family, the guilt of the helicopter pilot who would never forgive himself for the friendly fire incident, the void my absence would leave in the lives of those who loved me. But most remarkably, I saw beyond my death. I saw paths not taken, possibilities not realized. I saw the garage in Pennsylvania, run by someone else. I saw Carol eventually finding happiness with another man. I saw my squad returning home, carrying the memory of what happened that day like a wound that never fully healed. And I saw something else too, something that made no sense to me at the time. I saw myself returning, going back to the broken body in the jungle, living on, changed forever by what I had experienced. The being of light communicated to me that I had a choice. I could stay in this realm of light and love, continuing a journey I somehow knew had barely begun. Or I could return, bringing back a fraction of what I had learned here. A message for those still living in the physical world. Why would I go back? I asked, unable to imagine willingly leaving this place of perfect peace for the pain and limitation of physical existence. The answer came not in words, but in a profound understanding. Because you are needed there. Because what you have seen here can heal others. Because love demands it. I hesitated. The thought of returning to pain, to the broken body I'd left behind, was almost unbearable after experiencing this freedom. But as I considered it, I became aware of another aspect of this realm, a sense of purpose, of cosmic order. Everything that happened, even the tragedies, served in some way I couldn't fully comprehend. What message? I asked. What am I supposed to tell them? The being didn't answer directly. Instead, I was shown a series of images. People grieving, consumed by fear of death. People trapped in hatred, unable to forgive themselves or others. People destroying themselves and their world because they couldn't see the connections that bound them together. And I understood. The message wasn't a set of words to be memorized and repeated. It was an experience to be shared, a perspective to be offered. The knowledge that death is not the end, that love is the fundamental reality, that we are all connected in ways our physical senses can't perceive. As this understanding settled over me, I felt myself being drawn back toward the tunnel of light. Rodriguez was beside me again. It's not an easy road going back, he said, but you won't be alone. You're not coming, I asked, suddenly afraid. He smiled. My journey continues here, but we'll meet again. Time works differently in this place. It will seem like forever for you, but for me, it will be just a moment until I see you again. I wanted to ask more questions, to stay longer in this place of perfect understanding. But I was moving faster now, the realm of light receding as the tunnel narrowed around me. The descent was more disorienting than the ascent had been. The peace and clarity I'd experienced began to fade, replaced by confusion and increasing awareness of physical sensation. Pain returned, not all at once but gradually, like a tide coming in. I became aware of voices, urgent and strained. The rhythmic thumping of helicopter rotors. The feeling of being lifted, moved. A sharp prick in my arm. Then darkness again, but a different kind of darkness. The simple absence of consciousness rather than the profound transition I'd experienced before. In the darkness, disconnected fragments of the message I was meant to bring back floated like debris after a shipwreck. I tried to gather them, to hold on to them knowing they were precious beyond measure, but they slipped through my grasp, dissolving back into the void. When consciousness returned, it came in confusing flashes. Bright lights overhead, the antiseptic smell of a field hospital. Voices discussing my condition in clinical terms. Pain constant and throbbing, radiating from my back and side. He's waking up, someone said. A face appeared above me, a nurse, her expression a mixture of surprise and concern. Can you hear me, Sergeant? I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. She spooned some ice chips into my mouth, the cold moisture a blessed relief. You're at the 95th Evacuation Hospital in Da Nang, she explained. You've been unconscious for 3 days. The doctors didn't think. She trailed off, but I understood what she hadn't said. They didn't think I would wake up at all. Others? I managed to croak out. Her expression tightened. 4 of your squad didn't make it. Lieutenant Ellery, Peters, Johnson, and Martinez. The rest are being treated here or have already been transferred stateside depending on their injuries. 4 dead. The knowledge settled on me like a physical weight. 4 more names to add to the ever-growing list. 4 more families to receive those folded flags. Wilson? I asked. He's here, she said. Lost his left leg below the knee, but he's stable. He's been asking about you. I closed my eyes, processing this information. Wilson would live, but he'd go home forever changed. And Lieutenant Ellery, so young, so eager to prove himself, would go home in a box. The unfairness of it all was overwhelming. But beneath the grief and guilt, something else stirred in my consciousness. Fragments of memory from somewhere else. A place of light. A profound peace. A message I was supposed to remember. I struggled to hold on to these fragments, to reassemble them into something coherent. But they kept slipping away like a dream fading upon waking. The more I tried to grasp them, the faster they dissolved. You should rest, the nurse said, noticing my distress. Your body's been through a tremendous trauma. It's a miracle you survived it all. Miracle. The word triggered something. A fleeting glimpse of golden light, of being known and loved completely. But then it was gone again, leaving only a hollow ache where certainty had briefly flared. Something happened, I whispered. While I was... You're gone. Something important. The nurse patted my hand gently. The mind does strange things when the body's injured. Don't worry about it now. Just focus on healing. But I couldn't let it go. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that I had experienced something real, something profoundly meaningful, and I had been sent back to share it. As the days passed in the hospital, my physical condition slowly improved. The wounds in my back and side began to heal, though the doctors warned me I would always carry the scars. My internal injuries were severe, but not catastrophic. With time and physical therapy, they believed I would regain most of my former function. But my mental state was another matter. I was plagued by fragmentary memories of my near-death experience, tantalizing glimpses of a reality I could no longer fully access. I became obsessed with trying to recapture what I had seen and learned, to piece together the message I was meant to deliver. The medical staff attributed my preoccupation to trauma, to the psychological aftermath of combat and severe injury. They prescribed sedatives to help me sleep and suggested I speak with the chaplain about my spiritual concerns. I did talk to the chaplain, a kind, patient man named Father Mackenzie. Unlike the doctors and nurses, he didn't dismiss my experience as delusion or the product of an oxygen-deprived brain. Near-death experiences aren't uncommon, he told me during one of our conversations, especially in war zones. Many people report similar elements. The tunnel of light, the feeling of peace, seeing deceased loved ones. It wasn't just a feeling, I insisted. It was more real than this. I gestured at the hospital room around us, and I was sent back for a reason, with a message. What was the message? He asked gently. I struggled to articulate it, to translate the pure understanding I had briefly accessed into the limited vehicle of human language. That's what I can't remember clearly. It's like trying to describe colors to someone who's been blind from birth. The words aren't adequate. Father Mackenzie nodded thoughtfully. The mystics of many traditions have reported the same difficulty. The experience of the divine often exceeds our capacity to express it. But I need to remember, I said, frustration making my voice sharp. That's the whole point of coming back, to bring the message. Perhaps, he suggested, the message isn't something you're supposed to recite like a memorized text. Perhaps it's something you're meant to live. His words resonated with something deep inside me, a fleeting recognition, a momentary clarity. But then it was gone again, leaving me in the familiar fog of almost remembering. A week after I regained consciousness, I was allowed to visit Wilson. He was in a different ward, his bed surrounded by other amputees in various stages of recovery. When he saw me approaching, his face lit up with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sarge, they said you were awake, but I didn't believe it until now. I eased myself into the chair beside his bed, my wounds protesting the movement. Takes more than friendly fire to keep me down. The attempt at gallows humor fell flat. Wilson's smile faded, replaced by a haunted look I was seeing too often in the mirror. It was FUBAR, wasn't it? He said quietly. 1 minute we're doing recon, the next our own choppers are lighting us up. I nodded, the memories of that day still painfully sharp. They thought we were the enemy. Heard the firefight, saw muzzle flashes in the jungle. Not your fault, Wilson said quickly. You tried to call it off. I heard you. Not soon enough. The weight of responsibility settled on me again, heavier than before. I was the senior non-commissioned officer. I should have been more insistent with the lieutenant about withdrawing when things felt wrong. Should have anticipated the possibility of friendly fire when we heard the helicopters. Wilson seemed to read my thoughts. Don't go down that road, Sarge. We all made it through training. We all knew the risks. What happened out there? That's just the reality of this mess of a war. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. Then Wilson shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. Can I ask you something? Something weird? Sure. He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. When you were hit, before the medevac got to us, you were gone, Sarge. No pulse, not breathing. For almost 5 minutes. I waited, sensing there was more. Then you suddenly gasped and started breathing again. Just like that. The medic called it a spontaneous resuscitation, but right before it happened, he paused, looking embarrassed. I know this sounds crazy, but I swear I saw something leave your body and then come back again. Like I don't know, a shimmer in the air. A chill ran through me. You saw that? Wilson looked relieved that I wasn't dismissing him outright. Yeah, and that's not all. No, Mom. While you were gone, I felt this crazy sense of peace. Like everything was going to be okay somehow. It didn't make any sense. I was kneeling there in the jungle, covered in your blood, missing half my leg with dead friends all around me. But for just a minute, I felt this. Love. I finished for him. Pure love. Like being held in the hands of something infinitely kind. Wilson's eyes widened. Yeah, exactly like that. How did you know? And suddenly, with crystal clarity, I remembered. Not everything. The complete experience was still too vast to fit inside my human consciousness. But enough. Enough to understand why I had been sent back. Because I felt it too, I said softly. I was somewhere else, Wilson. Somewhere beyond all this. And I brought a piece of it back with me. Wilson stared at me, his expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty. What are you saying, Sarge? I'm saying that death isn't what we think it is. It's not an end. It's a transition. And what waits on the other side? I struggled to find the words. It's home. It's where we're from and where we're going back to. All of us. Even the enemy. Wilson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There are no enemies there. I replied with absolute certainty. Just souls learning and growing. The divisions we fight and die for here, they don't exist there. Wilson was silent for a long moment, processing what I'd said. Finally, he spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. Do you think Martinez and the others, are they okay? Are they there now? I nodded, tears filling my eyes as I remembered Rodriguez's presence, his assurance that we would meet again. They're more than okay. They're free in a way we can't imagine while we're still here. Then why did you come back? Wilson asked. If it's so amazing there, why return to all this? He gestured at his missing leg, at the ward full of broken young men around us. It was the question I'd been asking myself since I first awoke in the hospital. But now, looking at Wilson, seeing the pain and confusion in his eyes, the need for something to make sense of his suffering, I understood. To tell you, I said simply, to tell anyone who will listen. That's the message I was sent back with. That death is not the end. That love is what's real, more real than all this. I gestured at the hospital ward around us. That we're all connected in ways we can't see with our physical eyes. Wilson considered this, his expression thoughtful. That's a lot to take in, Sarge. I know, and I don't expect you to believe me just because I say so. But maybe it helps to know that there's more to all this than what we can see, that what happened to us, to all of us, isn't the end of the story. He nodded slowly. Maybe it does help. A little. We talked for a while longer about ordinary things. The food in the hospital, news from back home, the prognosis for his recovery. But something had shifted between us. A door had opened, if only slightly, to a different way of seeing our situation. As I got up to leave, Wilson caught my arm. Will you come back tomorrow? Tell me more about what you saw. Of course, I promised, as much as I can remember. And in that moment, I realized that this was how I would fulfill my purpose for returning. Not in some grand public declaration, but in quiet conversations with those who were ready to listen. One person at a time, starting with a young soldier who had lost his leg in a jungle on the other side of the world. The message wouldn't be delivered in words alone, but in how I lived from that day forward. In the certainty I carried with me, even when memories of the experience itself grew dim. In the love I could offer others, reflecting just a fraction of the love I had experienced beyond the veil. As I made my way back to my ward, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. Not the all-encompassing peace of the realm of light. That was beyond the capacity of physical existence to contain. But a quieter peace, a human-sized portion of that greater reality. I would heal. I would return home. I would build a life informed by what I had glimpsed on the other side. And whenever someone was ready to hear, I would share what I had learned. That death is not the end. That love is what's real. That we are all, every one of us, going home. I was medically evacuated from Vietnam in May of 1969, about 2 weeks after the incident. By then, I could walk short distances with assistance, and my internal injuries had stabilized enough for the long journey home. The doctors deemed me lucky to be alive, though their definition of lucky seemed questionable as I boarded the medical transport plane. My body held together by stitches, staples, and sheer determination. The flight was a blur of pain medication and fitful sleep. I remember fragments, the gentle hands of a flight nurse checking my bandages, the muffled crying of the soldier in the stretcher beside mine, the strange sense of displacement as we crossed time zones and continents. It felt like traveling between worlds, which in a way it was. I was leaving behind not just Vietnam, but the person I had been before I died. When we landed at Travis Air Force Base in California, we were transferred to a stateside military hospital. For me, that meant Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., where I'd spend the next 3 months in recovery and rehabilitation. The physical therapy was grueling. Learning to use my body again after the trauma it had endured was a daily battle against pain, weakness, and the temptation to surrender to limitations. But the physical challenges paled in comparison to the psychological and spiritual ones. I was trying to integrate two realities that seemed fundamentally incompatible. The harsh, material world of the hospital, with its fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell, and the luminous realm I had experienced during my death. The memory of that other place remained vivid, more real in many ways than my present circumstances, yet increasingly difficult to articulate in words that made sense to others or even to myself. The official diagnosis was PTSD complicated by a transient psychotic episode related to trauma and blood loss. The psychiatrist didn't use terms like near-death experience. In 1969, what I had seen and felt was, in their clinical assessment, merely the product of a dying brain starved of oxygen, hallucinations no more real than a dream or a drug-induced state. I knew better, of course, but I quickly learned to be selective about who I shared my experience with. The doctors and most of the nurses responded with professional skepticism. Fellow patients were more receptive, especially those who had come close to death themselves. A few of the hospital chaplains were genuinely interested, though they tended to interpret what I told them through the lens of whatever faith tradition they represented. Carol visited me twice during my hospital stay. The first visit was awkward, painful for us both. She tried to hide her shock at my appearance, at how much weight I'd lost, at the haunted look in my eyes that hadn't been there when I shipped out. We made small talk about her job, her family, the weather back home, anything but what had happened to me or what would happen to us. Her second visit, a month later, was different. She came prepared, resolved. She sat beside my bed, took my hand in hers and looked directly into my eyes. "I can't do this, James," she said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "I thought I could, but I can't." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I had seen this coming, had felt the growing distance between us even before her first visit. "You're not the same person," she continued, "and that's not your fault. I'm not blaming you, but I can't be what you need now, and I don't think you can be what I need either. I understand." I finally managed, and I did. Whatever future we might have had together had died in that jungle, along with the man I used to be. She slipped her engagement ring into my palm, closing my fingers around it, and kissed my forehead. "I hope you find peace," she whispered. Then she was gone. I lay there after she left, the ring warm in my hand, feeling a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Part of me mourned the loss of the future we had planned. But another part, the part that had seen beyond the veil, recognized that our paths had naturally diverged. Carol belonged to my old life, to a self I could never fully inhabit again. That night, I dreamed of the realm of light. Not just fragments or flashes, but a full immersion that left me breathless with longing when I woke. In the dream, Rodriguez was there again, along with Lieutenant Ellery and the others who had died that day in the jungle. They were whole, radiant, at peace. They showed me things I couldn't fully comprehend in my human state, patterns of connection that spanned time and space, the intricate weaving of all lives into a single vast tapestry. Remember, Rodriguez told me, though no words were actually spoken, remember why you came back. I woke with tears streaming down my face and a renewed sense of purpose. The dream had restored something I was in danger of losing, the visceral certainty of what I had experienced, the knowledge that death was not the end, that love was the fundamental reality, that we were all connected in ways our physical senses couldn't perceive. This wasn't just a comforting belief, it was what I had directly experienced. The next morning, I asked to speak with Father Mackenzie, the chaplain who had shown the most openness to my experience. He came that afternoon, pulling a chair close to my bed and listening patiently as I tried once again to convey what I had seen. "It sounds like you've been given a great gift," he said when I finished. "A glimpse behind the curtain that separates this life from the next. But what am I supposed to do with it?" I asked. "Sometimes I think I was sent back to share what I saw, but then I look at how people react when I try to talk about it, and I wonder if I'm just supposed to keep it to myself." Father Mackenzie considered this, his weathered face thoughtful. Throughout history, those who have had profound spiritual experiences have faced the same dilemma. He said, "The mystics and visionaries of every tradition struggled to communicate what they had seen and felt. Often they were misunderstood, sometimes even persecuted. That's not exactly encouraging," I said with a weak smile. He chuckled. "No, I suppose not." Then he grew serious again. "But here's what I believe, for whatever it's worth. These experiences aren't given randomly. If you were allowed to see what lies beyond, and if you were sent back rather than continuing your journey there, it was for a purpose. That purpose might not be to convince the skeptics or to give scientific proof of an afterlife. It might be much more personal, much more specific. Like what? That's for you to discover." He patted my hand. "Be patient with yourself and with others. The meaning will unfold as you're ready to receive it." I was discharged from Walter Reed in August 1969, 3 months after the friendly fire incident that had claimed my life and then, inexplicably, returned it to me. My physical recovery was deemed sufficient for outpatient care, though I would continue to deal with chronic pain and limited mobility for the rest of my life. I was processed out of the Army with an honorable discharge and a Purple Heart that felt more like an ironic joke than an honor, given that my wounds had come from American bullets. Going home to Pennsylvania was both a relief and a disorientation. My parents had converted my old bedroom into a first-floor guest room, so I wouldn't have to navigate stairs during my recovery. They treated me with a careful tenderness that both touched and frustrated me, as if I were made of glass and might shatter at any moment. They never asked about Vietnam, about what had happened to me there. I think they were afraid of the answers. The town itself had changed little in my absence, but my relationship to it had transformed completely. The familiar streets and buildings, the routines and rhythms of small-town life, the concerns that occupied my neighbors and former classmates, all of it seemed simultaneously precious and trivial. I found myself moving through this world like a visitor from another dimension, observing its patterns with a strange mixture of affection and detachment. My uncle's offer to buy into his garage was still open, and I gratefully accepted. The work gave me purpose and structure, something to focus on beyond my own thoughts and memories. It was physically demanding enough to be satisfying, but not so strenuous that my injuries prevented me from doing it well. And cars made sense to me in a way that people often didn't. They operated according to logical principles. When something was wrong, you could diagnose and fix it with the right knowledge and tools. But even as I settled into this new life, I couldn't escape the feeling that something essential remained unresolved. The message I had been entrusted with, the truth I had experienced beyond death, remained largely unshared. I had told Wilson and Father Mackenzie and attempted to explain it to a handful of others who seemed receptive. But was that enough? Was I fulfilling the purpose for which I had been sent back? The question haunted me through the autumn months and into winter. I went through the motions of rebuilding a life, working at the garage, reconnecting with old friends when I had the energy, attending physical therapy sessions and doctor's appointments. But beneath the surface of this ordinary existence, the extraordinary knowledge I carried created a constant current of tension. Then in January 1970, something unexpected happened that would change the course of my life. I was working late at the garage, finishing up a transmission repair that had taken longer than anticipated. The Pennsylvania winter darkness had fallen hours earlier, and snow was beginning to accumulate outside the garage doors. I was alone, focused on the task at hand, when I heard the bell ring, indicating someone had entered the front office. Wiping my hands on a shop rag, I made my way to the office, expecting to find a motorist with car trouble, or perhaps one of our regular customers picking up after hours. Instead, I found a woman in her early 30s, her coat dusted with snow, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said. "I know you're closed, but I saw the lights on, and I—" She hesitated, seeming to lose confidence in whatever had brought her here. "Car trouble?" I prompted, gesturing toward the windows where the snowfall was visible. She shook her head. "No, nothing like that." She took a deep breath. "My name is Sarah Milligan. My brother was Lieutenant Thomas Ellery." The name hit me like a physical blow. Lieutenant Ellery, young, eager to prove himself, killed instantly by the helicopter fire that had temporarily claimed my own life. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in months, but I thought of him often. "I know who your brother was," I said quietly. "I was with him that day." She nodded. "That's why I'm here." When they sent his personal effects home, there was a letter he'd written but never mailed. It mentioned you, said you were the experienced sergeant he relied on for advice. "It took me months to track you down." I gestured to the chairs by the small desk we used for customer consultations. "Please, sit down. Can I get you something?" "Coffee." She accepted the offer of coffee, and I busied myself with the ancient percolator in the corner of the office, grateful for the moment to collect my thoughts. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, she had removed her coat and was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the framed service photo of me on the wall, taken before Vietnam, before everything had changed. "You look different now," she observed as I handed her the coffee. "War changes people," I said simply, taking the seat across from her. "Yes," she agreed. "That's actually why I wanted to find you." She took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down carefully. "After Tommy died, I started having these dreams. Vivid dreams where he was trying to tell me something important. At first, I dismissed them as just my mind processing grief. But they kept coming, night after night, always with the same message. Find Sergeant Allen. He knows." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather ran through me. "Knows what?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "That's what I came to ask you," she said, her eyes searching my face. "What happened that day? Not just the official report, I've read that. What really happened? What does Tommy want me to know?" I sat back in my chair, considering my response carefully. This woman had traveled who knows how far, in winter weather, on the strength of a recurring dream. She deserved honesty. But could I give her what she was looking for without sounding like I'd lost my mind? "Ms. Milligan? Sarah, please." "Sarah." What happened that day is difficult to explain, especially to someone who wasn't there. "Try me," she said, her voice gentle but insistent. "Please, I need to understand." And so, in that small office with the snow falling silently outside, I told her everything. Not just about the patrol and the friendly fire incident, though I included those details too, but about what had happened after. About dying, about the tunnel of light, about the realm beyond and the beings I had encountered there. About seeing Rodriguez and feeling the presence of others, including possibly her brother. About the overwhelming love and acceptance I had experienced. The sense of coming home to a place I had always known, but somehow forgotten. About being given a choice to stay or return, and choosing to come back with a message. I spoke for what felt like hours, the words pouring out of me in a way they never had before. I didn't censor myself or try to make the experience sound more rational or conventional. I simply told the truth as I had lived it, as I continued to carry it within me. Throughout my telling, Sarah sat motionless, her coffee growing cold, her eyes never leaving my face. She didn't interrupt with questions or expressions of disbelief. She simply listened, completely present, taking in every word. When I finally fell silent, the office was so quiet I could hear the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional creak of the building settling in the cold. Sarah remained still for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. A small, sad smile that nevertheless held a kind of peace. "Thank you," she said simply. "That's what he wanted me to know. That's what the dreams were about." "You believe me?" I asked, unable to keep the astonishment from my voice. She nodded. "I do. Not just because of the dreams, though those opened me to the possibility. I believe you because..." She paused, searching for the right words. "Because truth has a resonance to it. What you've described, it fits with things I've felt but couldn't articulate. It answers questions I've had since I was a child. long before Tommy died. We talked for another hour, the conversation shifting from my near-death experience to her own spiritual journey, her grief over her brother's death, her search for meaning in the face of that loss. There was an ease between us that defied the circumstances of our meeting and the weight of the topics we discussed. By the time she left, the snow had stopped falling, and a strange sense of lightness had settled over me. As if in sharing my story with someone who truly heard and received it, I had fulfilled some small but essential part of my purpose for returning. Sarah stayed in town for 3 days, during which we met for dinner twice and took a long walk through the snow-covered park on the afternoon before her departure. She was a high school English teacher from Virginia, unmarried, devoted to her students and to the memory of her brother. She had a quiet intelligence and a gentle humor that drew me out of the isolation I had built around myself since returning from Vietnam. As we said goodbye at the bus station, she pressed a small notebook into my hands. "Write it down," she urged. "All of it, what you experienced, what you learned, what you want others to know. Even if you never share it with anyone else, the act of putting it into words will help you understand it better." I promised I would try, though I doubted my ability to capture in writing what I had struggled to express, even in speech. We exchanged addresses and agreed to stay in touch, neither of us acknowledging aloud the connection that had formed between us in such a short time. That night, I sat at my small desk in the room my parents had prepared for me, staring at the blank first page of the notebook Sarah had given me. How could I possibly begin to describe what had happened? What words could contain the immensity of what I had experienced? After several false starts, I closed my eyes and tried to recapture the feeling of that other realm. The peace, the love, the sense of homecoming. And then, without planning what I would write, I simply began. I died on April 17th, 1969, in a jungle in Vietnam. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what it means to be human. The words came slowly at first, then with increasing fluidity as I surrendered to the process. I wrote for hours that night, filling page after page with my attempt to translate the untranslatable. It wasn't perfect. No earthly language could fully capture what I had experienced beyond the veil, but it was honest, and in its honesty, it carried a fragment of the truth I had been sent back to share. Writing became a daily practice, a form of meditation that helped me process not just my near-death experience, but also the trauma of war and the challenges of reintegration into civilian life. I filled the notebook Sarah had given me and started another, then another. Sometimes I wrote about the realm of light directly. Other times I explored its implications for how we might live in this world with more compassion, more awareness of our interconnection, less fear of death and loss. Sarah and I exchanged letters regularly. I sent her portions of what I was writing. She responded with thoughtful reflections and gentle encouragement to continue. Our correspondence became a lifeline for me, a safe space to explore ideas that I still hesitated to share with others in my daily life. Then in April 1970, exactly 1 year after the incident that had taken my life and given it back, I received a thick envelope from Sarah containing newspaper clippings along with her usual letter. The clippings were from various sources, medical journals, religious publications, and mainstream newspapers, all discussing a phenomenon that was just beginning to enter public consciousness: near-death experiences. A cardiologist named Raymond Moody was collecting accounts from patients who had been clinically dead and then resuscitated, finding remarkable similarities in their stories, regardless of their religious backgrounds or prior beliefs. A psychiatrist named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was incorporating these experiences into her groundbreaking work on death and dying. Ordinary people were starting to come forward with their own stories of tunnels of light, deceased relatives, life reviews, and overwhelming love. Exactly the elements I had experienced but had struggled to communicate. "You're not alone," Sarah wrote in her letter. "What happened to you is happening to others all over the world. Your experience is part of a larger pattern, a bigger truth that's emerging into our collective awareness. Maybe that's part of why you were sent back, to be one voice among many, all pointing toward the same reality." Reading those articles was a revelation. For the first time since my return, I felt fully validated. It wasn't just that others had similar experiences, though that was certainly comforting. It was that serious researchers were beginning to study these experiences systematically, to look for patterns and meaning beyond religious dogma or psychological explanation. I wrote back to Sarah immediately, my letter filled with a new sense of purpose and possibility. Perhaps I didn't need to convince the skeptics or find the perfect words to describe what I had experienced. Perhaps I only needed to add my testimony to the growing chorus of voices, to be one thread in a tapestry that was gradually revealing itself. In June, Sarah came to visit again. This time, there was no pretense of coincidence or chance. She came specifically to see me, staying at the small hotel in town for a week. We spent every evening together after I finished work at the garage, talking for hours about everything and nothing, my writing, her teaching, our shared interest in these emerging studies of near-death experiences, and eventually, tentatively, our growing feelings for each other. On her last night in town, walking back to her hotel under a sky brilliant with stars, I found the courage to take her hand. She intertwined her fingers with mine without hesitation, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "I'd like to come back," she said softly, "not just for a visit." "I'd like that too," I replied, my heart racing with a mix of elation and fear. "But are you sure? My life is complicated. I'm still dealing with a lot from Vietnam, from what happened after. And physically, I'm not the man I was before." She stopped walking and turned to face me, her expression serious in the starlight. "James, I've read every word you've written about your experience. I believe you. I believe in what you saw and felt beyond this life. Do you think I would care about physical limitations or emotional scars after that? We're souls first, bodies second. I know who you are beneath all of that." Her words broke something open in me, a final barrier of self-protection that I had maintained even as we grew closer. I pulled her into an embrace, burying my face in her hair, overwhelmed by gratitude for this unexpected gift, to be known so completely and accepted so unconditionally. Sarah moved to Pennsylvania that August, taking a teaching position at the local high school. We were married in a small ceremony in October, with my parents, her sister, and a few close friends in attendance. Father Mackenzie, who had stayed in touch since my time at Walter Reed, performed the ceremony. Our life together was not without challenges. My injuries still caused chronic pain that sometimes made me irritable or withdrawn. I had nightmares about Vietnam, about dying, about being trapped between worlds. Sarah had her own griefs and struggles, including the ongoing process of mourning her brother and navigating the complex emotions that came with building a life with someone who had been with him when he died. But underlying these normal human difficulties was a shared understanding that transformed them. We both knew, in different ways but with equal certainty, that this physical life was only part of a larger journey. That knowledge didn't eliminate suffering, but it changed our relationship to it, giving us a perspective that made even the hardest days bearable. In the years that followed, I continued to work at my uncle's garage, eventually buying him out when he retired in 1975. Sarah taught English and occasionally creative writing at the high school, beloved by her students for her compassion and her ability to see potential in even the most troubled teens. We never had children of our own, a consequence of my internal injuries, but we became surrogate parents to many of Sarah's students and to the children in our extended family. And I continued to write. What had begun as a personal exercise in processing my near-death experience gradually evolved into something more deliberate, more structured. Sarah encouraged me to organize my writings into a book, not for publication necessarily, but as a coherent record of what I had experienced and learned. "Your testimony matters," she insisted. "Even if it reaches only a few people, it could make all the difference to those few." I worked on the manuscript in the evenings and on weekends, shaping years of fragmented writings into a coherent narrative. Sarah edited, questioned, pushed me to clarify points that seemed obvious to me but might confuse a reader unfamiliar with near-death experiences. It became a collaborative project, a labor of love that deepened our connection even as it helped me fulfill what I increasingly understood as my purpose for returning. In 1978, through a series of coincidences that felt guided by something beyond chance, my manuscript found its way to a small publishing house specializing in spiritual and metaphysical topics. To my astonishment, they wanted to publish it. Beyond the Veil, A Soldier's Journey Through Death and Back, was released in the spring of 1979, a modest volume with a simple cover showing a tunnel of light. The book didn't make any bestseller lists or receive attention from mainstream critics, but it found its audience. People who had experienced their own brushes with death, those grieving loved ones, spiritual seekers, and veterans still struggling to make sense of their war experiences. Letters began arriving from readers who found comfort or validation in my story, who recognized elements of their own experiences in what I described, or who simply appreciated an honest account from someone who had glimpsed what might await us all. Perhaps the most unexpected response came from Wilson, my squad mate who had lost his leg in the same friendly fire incident that had taken my life. I had lost touch with him after we both left Walter Reed, each focused on our own recovery and reintegration. But somehow he came across my book in a VA hospital library in California. His letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday in November 1979. The handwriting instantly recognizable despite the years that had passed. Dear Sarge, I never thought I'd be writing to you after all this time, but life has a way of bringing things full circle. I found your book in the hospital library here in San Diego, where I've been getting treatment for some complications with my prosthetic. I started reading it expecting a typical war memoir, and instead found myself back in that hospital and denying, listening to you try to explain what happened while you were gone. I want you to know that what you told me back then, and what you've written now, it changed me. Not all at once, but gradually, fundamentally. After I got home and tried to put my life back together, not very successfully at first, I'll admit, I kept coming back to what you said about there being something beyond all this, about love being what's real. For years, I thought about those words while I was drinking too much, or feeling sorry for myself, or angry at the world for what had happened to me. They were like a pebble in my shoe, irritating but impossible to ignore. Eventually, they wore down my resistance. I started to consider that maybe you were right, that maybe there was more to my story than just being a used-up soldier with one leg. I got sober 5 years ago, started volunteering at the VA, talking to other vets, got married to an amazing woman who sees me, not just my missing leg, had a daughter who's the light of my life. And through it all, I've carried what you shared with me, the certainty that death isn't the end, that we're all connected in ways we can't see with our physical eyes. I never had a near-death experience like you did, but I believe you. I believe because what you described matches something I've always known deep down, but didn't have words for until you gave them to me. And I believe because living as if what you said is true has made me a better man than I would have been otherwise. Thank you, Sarge, for coming back, for telling the truth as you experienced it, for planting a seed that took a long time to grow but eventually changed everything. Your friend Wilson, I read his letter through tears, then handed it to Sarah, who had the same response. This was the confirmation I had never sought but deeply needed, that what I had been through, what I had struggled to articulate, had made a tangible difference in someone's life, that the message I had been sent back with had reached at least one person who needed to hear it. Wilson's letter marked a turning point. It helped me see that the value of sharing my experience wasn't in convincing skeptics or achieving widespread recognition, but in connecting with those who were ready to receive what I had to offer. It wasn't about numbers, it was about depth of impact. Emboldened by this realization, I began accepting invitations to speak at small gatherings, church groups, grief support circles, veterans organizations. I never presented myself as an authority on the afterlife or claimed that my experience was universal. I simply shared what had happened to me, what I had seen and learned, and how it had transformed my understanding of life and death. In these intimate settings, I often encountered others who had their own stories of near-death or spiritually transformative experiences, but had never felt safe sharing them. My willingness to speak openly seemed to create a space where they could do the same. Each gathering became a kind of sanctuary where the veil between worlds felt momentarily thinner, where the artificial boundary between the spiritual and the mundane dissolved. Sarah often accompanied me to these events, her presence a steady support and her insights valuable in the discussions that followed my talks. She had a gift for making people feel safe sharing their most vulnerable experiences, for asking questions that opened new avenues of understanding without challenging the authenticity of what was being shared. As the years passed, I noticed an increasing openness in our society to these kinds of experiences and conversations. What had been dismissed as hallucination or wishful thinking in the immediate aftermath of my own near-death experience was gradually gaining recognition as a significant phenomenon worthy of serious study. More medical professionals, researchers, and ordinary people were willing to consider the possibility that consciousness might not be solely a product of the physical brain, that it might continue in some form beyond bodily death. I didn't take credit for this shift. It was happening globally, driven by thousands of experiences like mine and by courageous researchers willing to investigate what mainstream science had previously ignored. But I felt grateful to be part of the movement, to add my voice to the chorus testifying to a reality larger and more compassionate than our materialist culture acknowledged. In 1994, 25 years after the friendly fire incident that had temporarily claimed my life, I was invited to speak at a conference on near-death experiences in Boston. It was the largest audience I had ever addressed. Nearly 300 people, including physicians, psychologists, clergy from various traditions, and individuals who had their own near-death experiences. Standing at the podium, looking out at all those attentive faces, I felt a moment of panic. Who was I to be speaking to such a group? I was just a garage mechanic from Pennsylvania who had died once in a jungle halfway around the world. I had no advanced degrees, no formal training in medicine or psychology or theology. And then, just as I was about to begin speaking, I had the distinct sensation of not being alone at the podium. It wasn't a visual experience. I didn't see anyone standing beside me, but I felt a presence, warm, supportive, familiar. Rodriguez. And not just him, but others too. Lieutenant Ellery, Martinez, all those who had died that day in Vietnam and had welcomed me briefly to the other side before I returned. The fear fell away. I looked out at the audience again and began simply, as I always did. I died on April 17, 1969, in a jungle in Vietnam. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what it means to be human. The response to that talk was overwhelming. People lined up afterward to speak with me, many with tears in their eyes, sharing their own experiences or expressing gratitude for the validation and hope my story had given them. I signed copies of my book until my hand cramped, had conversations that stretched late into the night, and left the conference with a deepened sense of connection to a community of kindred spirits. But perhaps the most significant outcome of that conference was an invitation to participate in a research study being conducted by a prominent cardiologist who was documenting near-death experiences that occurred during cardiac events. He was particularly interested in my case because it involved a traumatic death rather than a cardiac arrest, yet included elements common to NDEs from various causes. I agreed to participate, undergoing interviews, psychological evaluations, and even brain scans as part of the study. The research team was professional and respectful, approaching my experience with scientific rigor, but without the dismissive skepticism I had encountered from medical professionals immediately after my return. When the study was published in a respected medical journal in 1996, it included my case along with dozens of others, all pointing toward the same conclusion, that near-death experiences could not be fully explained by current scientific models of how the brain functions. The consistency of these experiences across different cultures, religious backgrounds, and circumstances of death suggested something more profound than mere hallucination or chemical reaction was taking place. The publication lent a new kind of credibility to what I had been saying for years. It didn't prove the reality of an afterlife in the sense that science can prove the existence of a physical object, but it opened the door to serious consideration of possibilities beyond the materialist paradigm that dominated Western medicine and psychology. For me personally, this validation was gratifying, but not necessary. I had long since made peace with the fact that some would never believe what I had experienced, while others would recognize its truth immediately, regardless of scientific support. My certainty didn't depend on external confirmation, but I was grateful for the research nonetheless, because it created pathways for more people to encounter these ideas, to consider possibilities they might otherwise have dismissed. Each person who opened themselves to the reality of consciousness beyond physical death was one more thread in the tapestry of understanding that was gradually being woven across our culture. As I entered my 70s, I began to feel the weight of age more acutely. The injuries from Vietnam that had never fully healed caused increasing pain and limitation. I sold the garage to a younger mechanic who had worked with me for years, though I still stopped by regularly to keep my hand in and to enjoy the familiar smells and sounds that had been the backdrop of my working life for decades. Sarah retired from teaching, and we traveled when my health permitted, not to exotic destinations, but to visit friends and family, to speak at small gatherings where my story might be helpful, and occasionally to return to significant places from our past. We made a pilgrimage to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., where I traced Lieutenant Ellery's name on the black granite wall and said a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey his death had set me on, circuitous though it had been. Death no longer held any fear for me, not my own at least. I had experienced it once and found it to be a doorway rather than an end. What I feared more was leaving Sarah, causing her pain through my absence. We talked about this openly, as we had learned to discuss all difficult matters. She understood that death was a transition rather than a termination, but she was honest about the grief she would feel when we were separated, however temporarily. "I'll miss your physical presence," she said one evening as we sat on our porch watching the sunset. "The sound of your voice, the feel of your hand in mine." Knowing that reality continues beyond what we can see doesn't mean we won't miss the embodied experience of being together. "I'll wait for you," I promised. "However long it takes." She smiled, her face still beautiful to me despite the lines that time had etched there. "I know you will, and I'll look for signs of you after you're gone. Don't be subtle, I might miss it." I laughed at that. "I'll do my best to be obvious. Knock books off shelves, flicker the lights, the whole ghostly repertoire." "Good," she said, squeezing my hand. "I'll be expecting it." In the spring of 2019, exactly 50 years after my death and return in the jungles of Vietnam, I had a heart attack while working in our garden. It wasn't dramatic, just a sudden pressure in my chest, a shortness of breath, a sense of something fundamentally wrong. Sarah recognized the symptoms immediately and called an ambulance. At the hospital, they told us I needed bypass surgery. The doctor was cautiously optimistic about my chances of recovery, given my age and overall health. But as they prepared me for surgery, I had a profound sense of déjà vu. The same feeling I had experienced just before the helicopter fire tore through the jungle canopy in Vietnam. A certainty that everything was about to change. I asked for a moment alone with Sarah before they took me to the operating room. When the nurses stepped out, I took her hand, my eyes holding hers steadily. "If I don't wake up from this," I said, "know that I'm okay. More than okay. I'm going home." She nodded, tears filling her eyes, but her expression serene. "I know, but try to come back anyway. I'm not ready to be without you just yet. I'll do my best," I promised. "But if it's my time, then go in peace," she finished for me. "And send me a sign when you get there." The surgical team returned, and Sarah stepped back, blowing me a kiss as they wheeled me toward the operating room. That image, her standing there, love radiating from her despite her fear, was the last thing I saw before the anesthesia took effect. What happened next was both familiar and new. The same sensation of moving upward, of leaving my body behind. The same tunnel of light, the same feeling of expansion and freedom. But this time, there was no disorientation, no confusion about what was happening. I was returning to a place I had visited before, a place that had never ceased to feel like my true home, despite the 50 years I had spent away from it. At the end of the tunnel, there they were. All the souls I had known and loved who had crossed over before me. My parents, who had died within months of each other a decade earlier. Lieutenant Ellery, still young as I had known him, but radiating a wisdom that transcended his physical age. Rodriguez, Martinez, all the others who had died in Vietnam, and other faces too. Friends, relatives, even people I had known only briefly, but who had touched my life in some meaningful way. Their welcome was joyous, a homecoming beyond any earthly celebration. Communication flowed without words, perfect understanding passing between us. Time seemed to operate differently here, expanding and contracting according to need, rather than ticking forward in mechanical precision. As before, I experienced a life review. Not just the years since my first death, but my entire existence from birth to this final transition. I saw the connections between events that had seemed random, the purpose behind encounters that had appeared accidental, the growth that had emerged from suffering. I saw how my near-death experience and subsequent return had altered not just my own life, but the lives of countless others through ripples of influence I had never fully perceived while embodied. And most clearly of all, I saw Sarah, the perfect timing of her arrival in my life, the healing we had facilitated in each other, the souls we had touched together through our shared testimony. I saw her now, sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand as machines beeped and medical staff moved efficiently around us. I felt her grief beginning to well up as she sensed what was happening, but also her profound acceptance, her trust in what I had told her about this transition. For a moment, I felt pulled back toward her, toward that body that had carried me through 50 years of life after death. The same choice presented itself as before, to return or to continue onward. But this time, the pull to continue was stronger. My work in the physical world was complete. The message I had been sent back to deliver had been shared, received by those who needed it, integrated into a growing body of testimony about the reality that exists beyond the veil of physical existence. It was time to go home for good. The being of light that had greeted me during my first death appeared again. the same golden radiance, the same sense of ancient wisdom and perfect love. Though no words were spoken, I understood that my choice was honored, that my journey in physical form had reached its natural conclusion. With a final look back at Sarah, a wordless communication of eternal love, and the certainty of eventual reunion, I turned toward the light and moved forward, embraced by a love beyond imagination, finally and fully home. From the hospital room, Sarah would later tell others, she felt the exact moment of my passage. A profound peace filled the room, and though the medical team continued their desperate efforts to resuscitate me, she knew I was already gone. Not lost, not ended, but transformed and continued in a realm just beyond the reach of physical perception. 3 days after my death, as she sat alone in our bedroom, sorting through old photographs, the bedside lamp flickered repeatedly, on, off, in a pattern too regular to be coincidence or electrical malfunction. She laughed through her tears, recognizing my promised sign. "Subtle as always, James," she said to the empty room that didn't feel empty at all. "I miss you, but I'm glad you're home." In the years that followed, Sarah continued our work, speaking about near-death experiences, about grief and loss, about the continuity of consciousness and the reality of love that transcends physical death. She shared my story alongside her own, keeping my testimony alive even as scientific research continued to accumulate evidence supporting what I had experienced and reported decades earlier. And sometimes, in the space between wakefulness and sleep, she would feel my presence, not imagined or symbolic, but real. In those moments, the veil between worlds would thin, and we would communicate heart to heart, soul to soul, our love undiminished by the temporary separation of physical death. This is the truth I died to learn and returned to share. We are not our bodies. We are consciousness, spirit, soul, whatever term resonates most deeply. We are eternal, though our physical forms are temporary. We are connected beyond time and space, bound by bonds of love that death cannot sever. And when we leave these bodies behind, we are not ending. We are going home. I know this not as a belief or a hope, but as a direct experience. I have died twice and been born many times. I have seen beyond the veil that separates this world from the next. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, there is nothing to fear. Only love awaits us there. Only love.